story now. Robert Parsons, our International Affairs Editor, joins us. Today, Rob, we are discussing Russia and a possible change in its foreign policy now that Putin's back at the Kremlin.
Yes, but I think that really works on the assumption that what we saw during the Russian election wasn't the real Putin, that in some sense that he was putting on a show for the Russian public, that once the election was out of the way, we'd see a softer, nicer Mr. Putin. The simple reality, though, is what we saw in the Russian election is the quintessential Vladimir Putin. He's not going to change his spots now. This is a man who sees the world in black and white terms. He believes genuinely that Russia is surrounded by enemies. He distrusts completely the Russian opposition, which he describes as scavengers hanging around Western embassies. So I don't think that Russia is going to change its direction under this third term of Vladimir Putin as president. It's extremely unlikely. I think possibly the language may be a little bit softer, but the essence will be just the same.
Well, for a while it seemed that Russia and the US might find common language on Iran. Is it likely that Putin will seek to recalibrate his policy to bring it closer to the Western approach?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be said about Iran is that Russia genuinely has doubts that Iran is moving towards a nuclear weapon. Bear in mind that if Iran were to get a nuclear weapon, the Russians would feel more threatened than anybody else. They have a border which is close to Iran. In the past, they've had conflict with Iran. It's not in their interest that the Iranians should have a nuclear weapon. They are not convinced, however, that that's where the Iranians are going at the moment. So they do have doubts. So I don't think they're going to agree with the United States or the rest of the Western world on sanctions. Sanctions, the fact that the West is imposing sanctions suits the Russians for a couple of other reasons as well. It wins them plaudits with the Chinese, it wins them plaudits with the Iranians, plus it suits Russia because it's pushing the oil price up, upwards perhaps to somewhere in the region of $130 by the end of the year. That is essential if Vladimir Putin is to carry through the sort of reforms that he says he wants to push through over the next 5 years. If he wants to modernize the Russian army, it is absolutely essential for him to have a high oil price. If he wants to carry through pension rises, infrastructure modernization, he has to have an oil price that's very high. If he doesn't, the Russian economy is in trouble, and so is he.
What about Syria, Rob? Because there are some people in Washington who believe that now Putin's back for a third term, he might perhaps be a little more favourable towards supporting a UN Security Council resolution on taking more action there.
But this again is based on the assumption that what we saw in the Russian elections, in the run-up to the Russian elections, wasn't the real Vladimir Putin, that really he was just putting a show on so that he'd win the election. But that's based on a misunderstanding about Russian politics. Vladimir Putin was always going to win this election. As far as Vladimir Putin is concerned and the Russian political establishment is concerned, Syria, led by Bashar al-Assad, is critical. It is the cornerstone of Russian policy in the Middle East. It is almost inconceivable that Russia at this stage would change its policy towards Syria and the regime there. So I think it's extremely unlikely that we'll see any shift in the Russian position.
So then is it on a collision course with the West over this?
Well, I mean, I think perhaps on a collision course is probably putting it a bit too strongly. There are certain positive signs that are happening at the moment. The fact, for instance, that the United States has joined Russia is about to join the WTO, the World Trade Organization. There will be opportunities for greater investment in the Russian economy. It is possible, for instance, that the United States Congress will repeal the Jackson-Vanik amendment was introduced way back in 1974, which links improvements in trade between Russia and the United States to improvement in or free emigration from the Soviet Union. That's clearly way out of date, but it hasn't been reformed. If that were to be taken off the books, trade opportunities between Russia and the United States could certainly increase. But having said that, there's no doubt that Russia is set on a course. If the oil price is high, Russia under Vladimir Putin will spend a huge amount of money on modernizing its military. And will, as a consequence, will feel itself more assertive, more aggressive. On the other hand, if the oil price doesn't go up and Russia cannot modernize its military, if it can't improve infrastructure, if it can't spend money on things like social spending, Russia under Vladimir Putin is going to be a very insecure place, and as a consequence also aggressive. So I think whichever way things develop over the next few years, we're not going to see a friendly Russia.
And just quickly, Rob, is there anything the West and the US can do to win over Putin? Just very quickly.
I think it's extremely unlikely. I think what we may see once the election is over the United States is that the United States starts to adopt a slightly tougher approach towards Russia. We may see, for instance, a law introduced which will tie freedom of movement of Russian officials to their record on human rights and corruption, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that update. Rob Parsons, that's our International Affairs Editor. Just bringing you the headlines again. It's a done deal.